Welcome back to The Overlook. I'm your host, Dominique Hoffman, and today we're going to be talking about the rise of anti-Semitic Brads and Chads across American university campuses and just with the Gen Z age group and demographic. So when we talk about the anti-Israel, pro-Palestinian social justice movement happening across American universities since October 7th, the images you're probably thinking of are extremely liberal college-age students, maybe with blue hair, maybe wearing a Queers for Palestine shirt or a Feminist for Palestine shirt with keffiyehs wrapped around their head and COVID masks on. These were the people who were outraged that not everyone got the COVID vaccine and who are calling Israel's war campaign a genocide. These are the same individuals who had black squares with the BLM riots and movements. These are social justice warriors who have now taken on the plight of the Palestinians as their own and have elevated the Palestinian fight for self-determination as this moral symbol in their neo-Marxist social justice movement. The idea that once Palestine is free, then all other marginalized identities will also be freed, including the queers and women. And despite the fact that this is an ideological contradiction and that none of these people groups would ever be represented in an Islamist society run by Hamas, they nonetheless have taken on this plight. I think it highlights the main character syndrome plaguing Gen Z, deep narcissism, and a lack of understanding for what Hamas is. But again, it doesn't matter because it has become this moral symbol for the social justice left. And we've seen that sweep across American universities. We have the Columbia encampments, and Columbia was really the theater in which all of this happened, but also at Harvard and at Yale. We saw what happened at Yale a few weeks ago on Holocaust Remembrance Day and the harassment of Jewish students that took place there. But oddly, where the woke left and then what I'm calling the rising woke right, where they converge, is being anti-Israel, anti-Jewish. And on the woke right, we have many Brads and Chads, young Gen Z males who look up to individuals such as Tucker Carlson or Joe Rogan and get talking points from them or the guests that they have platformed on their very, very large channels. And they've adopted an anti-Israel, anti-Jewish worldview. Arguments that are very common on the woke right or that have morphed into this monolithic, I think, worldview is suspicion of all government institutions, suspicion of Hollywood, of our healthcare system, of any official expert or narrative. And what many of these free thinkers or MAGA Republicans will point to is they'll say, well, COVID is an example of how our government and corrupt established politicians and the media who are bed brothers and also then the healthcare system manipulated their power to lie to the American people. And because the COVID conspiracy was true, that this was created in the lab, that the COVID vaccines were actually not ready for mass distribution across the United States, and that COVID was not as deadly as they made it seem, and that the government used all of this to contract our democratic rights. Well, because that happened, then any official narrative given to us by our government should be one that we look upon with great suspicion. We should reject the official narrative and we should reject experts. I talked about the strange death of experts when we looked at the Douglas Murray, Dave Smith debate that happened on Joe Rogan's channel. And one idea that came up constantly and what they danced around in circles in that, I don't even want to call it a debate, it was really like a yelling match, was Douglas Murray asking Dave Smith, well, you have all of these very strong opinions about Israel and very strong condemnation for Israel. But have you ever been to Israel? Do you know what a blockade looks like? Do you understand the dynamics of war from both a modern and a historic perspective? And Dave Smith said, no. And him and Joe Rogan were outraged that Douglas Murray would ask what his credentials are. And they go, well, can't anyone have an opinion? And of course, we all can have opinions on salient policy issues. But what Douglas Murray was getting at is we have now rejected mainstream media and we've embraced new media to the point where there's anarchy of thought. Dave Smith, who is a comedian, who has no real world experience, no military background or foreign policy background, speaks about the war in Israel like he is an authority in the matter. He's not just expressing an opinion, he's presenting a policy prescription. And I think Douglas Murray was accurate in challenging him on what his credentials are. And I think that's emblematic, and it highlights this rejection of government institutions, academic institutions, mainstream media on the right. And now they've swung in the opposite direction to decentralized media. Everyone is an expert. Everyone has an opinion. Candace Owens can go on her podcast and say that the brown shirts, the Nazis, were actually really not that bad. And that Israel is really a pedophile state and is the temple of Satan that is talked about in Revelation. And that the Jews actually manipulate our education system because they're neo-Marxist. And neo-Marxists are also Jews, and they've lied to us about how bad the Holocaust is. Or Daryl Cooper going on both Joe Rogan and Tucker Carlson talking about how Winston Churchill was actually the villain of World War II, and the Allied forces actually were the perpetrators of the great evils, and that we've just been lied to by the neo-Marxist education system that is puppeteered by Zionists to believe that the Holocaust was a unique evil in and of itself. Candace Owens herself on her podcast made the claim that the Holocaust was not a unique evil and that the Allied forces killed 12 million German Christians, and therefore there was a genocide of Christians. This, of course, is ludicrous because there's a distinction between an intentional elimination of an entire people group because of who they are and then casualties of total war. But that doesn't fit her narrative, her anti-Jewish narrative. What these individuals on the right have done is try and make the Nazis not that bad and position the West as the agitators of evil and insinuate that they are actually controlled by the Zionists. That Winston Churchill declared war on Hitler because he was being puppeteered by the Zionists to then somehow get the state of Israel down the road. They somehow predicted the outcome of World War II just so that they can get the Jewish state of Israel. It is ahistorical, it's illogical, it's this paranoia of the Jews that they somehow puppeteer all of the evils of history to manipulate outcomes such as the state of Israel itself. And this has become a mainstream worldview, a mainstream position. I've seen people in my own life become sympathetic to these ideas, again, because the Republican Party, supporters of Trump, were berated for years as racist, as being conspiracy theorists, as, being suspicious of the government. It turns out, well, that actually was true in the case of COVID. But now Republicans have swung all the way to an extreme that now they're suspicious of everything. And we're seeing downstream of that what happens with the Gen Z youth, and specifically the Brads and Chads who read these arguments in Reddit chat rooms and without really understanding history or foreign policy or even theology, because another argument is that the Jews think that they're better than Christians, and how can Christians support the Jews or support Israel? And we're seeing all of this kind of emerge as a mainstream thought. Even 2 years ago, before October 7, Nick Fuentes was a fringe Republican in the public sphere. Everyone would have rejected what Nick Fuentes had to say about the Jews, about America, about the West and its position in history. And now Nick Fuentes looks pretty tamed compared to what some individuals are proposing is the reality of our political life and culture here in the United States. Okay. So I want to highlight something really quick. First, we have the two ideologies, right? So we have the woke left. These are the social justice warriors. These are the individuals who had black squares for BLM. These were the virtue signalers who wore masks for 3 years during COVID, got like 12 vaccines, and then posted about it on social media, berated and condemned those who didn't want to get vaccinated or get the booster, and who stayed inside for 4 years, discovered their sexuality, became asexual, bisexual, or they, thems, and pushed for a very, very radical postmodern ideal of society and social justice. So that's the woke left. That's what most of us are familiar with. If you are a Republican, you've probably been on the brunt end of racist accusations hurled at you for being a Republican or for voting for Trump or for wearing a red MAGA hat. And now being MAGA isn't taboo. Okay, so I went to Florida State University. I think it's relevant because I know what social justice looks like. There's a lot of social justice happening on my campus at that time. That was right before the BLM riots. But I also know a lot of Brads and Chads. So I got to see both sides of this ideological horseshoe because, as I'm going to point out, the woke right now has a ton of Brads and Chads who reject all of the social justice ideology of the left, but converge at the point of hating Israel and hating the Jews and being anti-Zionist. So they take on and adopt very different policy positions, but where they converge is, again, being anti-Zionist and also being anti-war. On the left, it's because war is neo-imperialism and the white man trying to impose their ideology on the marginalized, brown people, Africans, Middle East. And then on the right, the justification for being anti-war is actually we need to be America first, which means we have to withdraw from the global stage and we need to close our border and focus just on America. This is the America only camp when it comes to neo-isolationism. And this completely fails to understand that if you were going to be the hegemonic power, such as the United States, then you have to have a global presence because if not, your enemies, such as China and Russia, are going to move in that power vacuum. But that is a topic for another day. So again, both sides are anti-war, both sides are anti-Zionist for different reasons. It adopts different rhetoric, but they converge at that point and have created this weird symbiotic relationship with Islamists because they share an anti-Israel agenda. Okay, so this first news story we're going to look at is going to first touch on the Columbia protest that just erupted this past week. So this past week, a mob of some 80 students walked into Butler Library at Columbia University and staged a huge protest. They were screaming Intifada revolution from the river to the sea. It was chaotic. And Columbia cracked down on it because they've also had a lot of federal grants withheld because the Trump administration has taken a zero tolerance policy to this campus anti-Semitism. But of the 80 protesters, 61 of them were females. And that is pretty lockstep with just voting data, and that many young women, both millennial and Gen Zers, tend to lean Democrat or liberal, and most millennial or Gen Z men tend to lean Republican. So we're seeing on the woke right a predominantly male audience, which is sympathetic or susceptible to this woke right ideology. And the perfect example of that is what happened at the Temple University bar, or it's a Barstool bar in the town of Temple University. If you did not see it this past week. So this is what happened at Barstool's bar near Temple University in Philadelphia. I'm going to play it without any sound, but there's a light up sign, which typically happens when you order bottle service, and it says F the Jews. And the individual filming, his name is Mohammed Khan. He is a student at Temple University, and he's recording the people he's with. So most of them seem to be young girls, party age girls, maybe even sorority girls. They all appear to be Caucasian Americans. He keeps zooming in and out of the F the Jews sign in like a celebratory, fun kind of way to the beat of the club music. He thinks this is hilarious and funny. And then you see some Brads and Chads like laughing and thinking that this is like the funniest thing that they've ever seen. Okay. So first, I'd like to point out that a lot had to happen for that sign to be paraded through the bar and to be filmed and then posted. So the staff members at this bar had to construct the sign. Someone had to request the sign. Then someone had to parade the sign through the crowd. And then you have this young man, Mohammed Khan, recording it, laughing at it, and posting it on his social media. And then you had all of the young girls and the few Brads and Chads kind of like sheepishly like laughing at it, or even just like thinking it's hilarious and funny and jeering at the sign. So first off, the bystander effect is real because not one individual condemned what was happening in real time. But I think that's a symptom of how mainstream anti-Jewish rhetoric has become, and that this wasn't a crazy thing for them to parade through the bar. This is becoming prevalent. This is what the ideological endpoint of the arguments that Tucker Carlson makes, or that Candace Owens makes, or that Ian Campbell makes, or Joe Rogan makes, or Dave Smith. This is what this looks like in a simplified social movement, or what is socially acceptable. They are shifting social norms with their wildly popular platforms. And so Dave Portnoy, who owns Barstool, and again, let's also put into some context. Barstool is like frat boy 101. Barstool Sports has sports commentary, but Barstool itself is like this huge media empire. It's geared towards fraternity and sorority aged girls. I don't think Dave Portnoy was ever like explicitly MAGA, but he did become MAGA very outspokenly in the last election in 2024. And so this is geared towards your Republican fraternity bro. Like if you even think of Alex Cooper and Call Her Daddy, right? Like a very over-sexualized blonde girl, looks like a sorority girl. That is who their audience is. And Dave Portnoy himself is Jewish. And so his bar, of course, is going to attract Brads and Chads. But he himself is not a fan of this woke right stuff. He doesn't call it woke right by name. But this is his reaction to what happened. Again, he is Jewish. And I think he was appropriately outraged at what happened. I'm going to show you the clip after he had kind of calmed down. And he comes up with, I think, a really ingenious response to these young students. So let's watch his response here.
Update on the Fuck the Jews sign that was at my bar in Philadelphia yesterday. 2 hours ago, he literally could have cooked an egg on my head. That's how much steam and heat I had come out of my ears. And the more I thought about it, it's like these are young fucking morons who did this. They're drunk. It's like, do you really want to ruin somebody's life? And let me be honest. I don't know what's going on in the world. I do, the Middle East, obviously, but I've been doing Barstool for 20 years. I've had more hate, more anti-Semitism in the last year and a half than I've ever had doing it. And whether people, it's like Kanye, the UFC guy, it's like mainstream lunatics. And I'm not talking about politics or what's going on in the Middle East, just hating groups of people. You hate my parents, you hate my grandparents, shit like that. It's crazy.
I think what Dave Portnoy is touching on from his own lived experience, while he's not calling it by name, is that as Tucker Carlson and as Candace Owens started to espouse these ideas, they gained traction, and now it's become socially acceptable to hate the Jews or to scapegoat the Jews. And the launch pad for that shift on the right was definitely October 7th. October 7th happened amidst war fatigue on the right. Obviously, sending a lot of money to Ukraine was a very unpopular policy for Republicans. Our border was wide open under the Biden administration. The economy was in absolute ruins. Inflation was crazy under the Biden administration. And so you had a Republican Party fatigued. They lost in 2020. Many people thinking that Trump didn't actually win, but that the deep state had manipulated Joe Biden to win. Then they endured 4 years of absolute chaos, of young American girls being murdered and raped, raped. I don't think, I'm not monetized, so I think I can say these words. I get worried about being blocked for YouTube terms and condition. But we saw an uptick in crime of young girls like Lincoln Riley being murdered by illegal immigrants. There was a lot of fatigue on the right. And again, that made the right very susceptible to this anti-Jewish conspiracy. And again, it is a very far swing, but the right is very anti-federal spending, especially to wars abroad that they don't feel a connection with. And despite the fact that Israel is fighting a just war and a war with our enemies who also hate us, which make them a very strategic ally for our own interest, people on the right are like over the war. So they were over the U.S. backing Israel on October 8th. And so again, this is where we see the right and the left converging on an anti-Israel policy position. And that was the launch pad and the floodgates opened for just overtly anti-Jewish social norms to develop on the right. And that is what Dave Portnoy is talking about. And he's right. He's been doing Barstool for 20 years. He's been interacting with the Brads and Chads for 20 years. And this is happening now. And I think COVID, yes. And then the Biden administration, the 2020 election, the BLM riots, and then October 7th was the perfect storm for this anti-Semitic movement on the right. I think it could have only happened in this window of time and all of the fatigue of the last 4 years. And so as he's noting, is he's feeling this in his personal life, right? So this culture that's developing is downstream of Tucker Carlson and Joe Rogan and Candace Owens, and what they're espousing is being adopted amongst this Gen Z Brad Chad age group.
So, yeah, my initial reaction was like, I'm going to fucking burn these people to the ground, their families, everything. And it's like, you know what? Maybe that's not the best course of action. Maybe I can use this as a teaching moment. And like, before people just are like, fuck the Jews or any group and the hate, let's try to like turn a hideous incident into maybe a learning experience, as cliche and very unlike me. But I talked to both the culprits who I know are super involved in it, talked to the families. I'm sending these kids to Auschwitz. They've agreed to go. That's, of course, the Holocaust concentration camps. Been in touch with the Crafts, who run the anti-hate group. We're going to send these kids to Auschwitz, and they're going to do a tour of the concentration camps in Germany and hopefully learn something. And maybe like their lives aren't ruined and they think twice, and more importantly, other people like, see, it's not just like words you're throwing around. So to me, that's a fair outcome of this event.
Okay. So, and then he goes on to say that the 2 employees who put the sign together and approved it were fired. Okay. So Dave Portnoy goes, you know what? I can ruin these kids' lives, or I can take them on a tour of the death camp so they can see the ideological ends of what they are espousing, what they are laughing at, what they are, I guess, making light of, and this bigotry that they are popularizing. And they said yes at first, and then they said no. So the students, specifically Muhammad Khan, who was the individual that posted the video, has now backtracked and said, well, I didn't do anything anti-Semitic. And we've seen that happen on the right. Candace Owens is the perfect example of this. She goes, well, I'm just asking questions. She'll say the most insane thing, like Israel was founded by Marxists as a safe haven for pedophiles, or that Christians in the Middle Ages would be kidnapped and killed and their blood would be drank by Jews, which is like the classic blood libel, which is false. But she'll say things like that and then go, oh, but I'm just asking questions. Oh, I'm not anti-Semitic. And there's a rejection of that label, again, from the fatigue on the right for the BLM days when everyone was racist for not agreeing with BLM. And so Candace Owens will say, you know how they used to call us racist for wearing a MAGA hat? Well, anti-Semite is the new label that they'll throw on us to try and silence us or to demonize us. And this young kid kind of took that same approach and said, well, I actually didn't do anything anti-Semitic. I didn't do anything wrong. And he posted a video saying that now he fears that Dave Portnoy is going to destroy his life and that he needs help raising money for legal funds should it, come to legal action being taken place. And he's raised $15,000 so far. Although I'm sure a lawyer will pick up his case pro bono if it came to that. But it says in the description, justice for Muhammad Khan. In America, innocence is sacred until proven otherwise. But today, my friend Muhammad Khan, a Temple University student, faces a devastating reality. His future, reputation, and freedom are under attack without a shred of due process. I'm asking for help to defend the principles of our justice system. Our justice system was built on. Okay. Well, Mr. Khan, or whoever wrote this, which sounds like it was Mr. Khan who wrote it, but Mr. Khan's friend who put this like go send me together. He posted it on his social media for public views, for public laughter, to make a public statement about how he felt towards the Jews. So the court of public opinion, this is not a criminal or a civil case. The court of public opinion can and should condemn him. Again, there is a rejection now of social taboos because the left radicalized that and made everything racist. So now we see individuals like Candace Owens or this Muhammad Khan kid, or even there was recently a story about a mother who called a young kid on the playground the N-word, and then she's now raised almost $1 million for her protection and any legal funds she might need. Like, we've now gone past the point of social norms on the right, where actually you should be able to call someone an anti-Semite, or you should be able to call a white mother who calls a young 5-year-old aged kid the N-word a racist. That's bigoted. That's in no world proper language. And so, yes, social norms do exist to guide society in a way that protects all of those who partake in it. So we're also seeing the dismantling of any social norms, and the right is pushing for that. So they're rejecting labels such as anti-Semite or racist. And again, that fatigue from the left has created an environment for that to be an acceptable thing, to reject these labels. Okay. So now Dave Portnoy and this Muhammad Khan kid are going back and forth. This has become a huge thing. It'll be interesting to see if it ever escalates to some sort of a civil suit. But I think it is very emblematic of what's happening on American university. So Charlie Kirt, who is the founder of TPS USA, or TPUSA, sorry, I always confuse the acronym. He does these debates on college campuses where he sits with a mic and then students will come up and ask him questions. And for the longest time ever, it's typically been liberal students who will come up and debate him and ask him questions about immigration policy, economic policy, LGBTQ plus rights, institutional racism. It's typically been the woke left narrative versus Charlie Kirt, who provides facts and an alternative conservative perspective. But recently, and you can see this here over the last few weeks, so this is 1 month ago, this is 3 weeks ago, this one's 3 days ago, and this is the one we're actually going to watch. We've seen a rise in students coming up to debate him on his position when it comes to Israel. And the ones I'm really interested in are like the Brads and the Chads who have come up to try and get these clickbait, I got you moments with Charlie Kirt. So we're going to watch this one example because I think it really perfectly highlights the movement that is now sweeping college universities.
I just want to start off by saying I have no disrespect to any other religion. I respect all religion. This is more of a question for you and whether or not you can confirm this. The Talmud states that Jews are the chosen people and all non-Jews are goyim, here to serve them. You are a Christian who's clearly serving the Jews, defending Zionism with all you got. But you also believe Jesus is a rabbinic Jew in heaven when you know the Talmud states he's in hell burning in feces.
Okay, so you're a Talmudic expert, right? Which Talmud is that in? Jerusalem or Babylonian?
I'm talking about Jerusalem, sir.
Oh, that's the Jerusalem, which actually is not as divinely inspired. Which one's longer and how long is it? Don't look at your phone. Look at me in the eye.
I'm not
No, come
really
on.
aware.
You said that I'm a tool of the Jews. So look at me in the eye like
I
a
never
man.
said I'm talking about the Talmud.
No, you accused me of saying like you're a Zionist or something, right?
I mean, do you support Israel?
Yes, of course I do. Yes.
Okay, that's good for you. But that's another thing. You're an advocate for the military in America.
Hold on, time out.
But then you agree with Israel's war crimes. What's up with that?
Oh, war crimes. We'll get into that, but let's be more specific. Yeah. What is your point here of dragging up a multi-thousand-year text that you don't know, that you haven't read?
I mean,
have you purchased the Talmud? Have you read the Talmud? What is the Talmud? Tell me the difference between the Torah, the Tanakh, and the Talmud. Go ahead.
Okay, so this is actually the second debate where I've seen Charlie Kirt talking about this, which is these young guys who go up to debate him and ask him some crazy question, and they pull a quote from the Talmud out of context. And again, as Charlie Kirt goes on to highlight, the Talmud is not like divinely inspired scripture. It's rabbinic kind of debate and commentary on the scriptures. And it's supposed to be this I got you question. And it's supposed to frame the Jews in a very negative light and in an anti-Christian light. And the insinuation here is that Charlie Kirt, being a Christian, then must also be controlled by the Jews or by Zionism to then be pro-Israel. And it's an attempt to make the Jews look bigoted and anti-Christian, but also to try and paint and then prove that individuals who are conservatives and support Israel and are Christians are then being controlled by the Jews.
I don't know.
Oh, you don't know. That's pretty important. Time out. So what you did is you cherry picked something on the internet that makes Jews look bad, but you can't tell me the difference between the Torah and the Tanakh and the Talmud.
I'm not trying to make the Jews look
No,
bad.
this is ridiculous. This is for clickbait. Let me tell you the difference. The Torah is the books that we as Christians acknowledge. Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, the most holy scriptures in Judaism. The Tanakh is also our Old Testament, right? That's Joshua, Judges, 1st and 2nd Kings, Hezekiah, Nehemiah, Ezekiel. The Talmud are rabbinic debates spanning over 500 years, of which there's the Babylonian and the Jerusalem Talmud. The Babylonian is actually more inspired. It's 2.5 million words. The Jerusalem is lesser inspired, and they disagree on all sorts of stuff, and they pick it up. Those are people that would say, well, I disagree with that. No, but hold on a second. But it's very important. You don't even know the stuff that you're bringing up to this event.
That's why I'm asking you.
No. It's really important because what you're trying is like this context. You're a tool of the Jews, and I read this thing. But let's just make this very clear.
Sir, it's an agreed to disagreement. I'm not here.
It's not.
And what he's pointing out is that these kids know nothing. And there was another debate, which I want to react to in a separate video, where the guy basically says that Israel is like a modern like temple of Satan, and that the Jews of Israel today are not the Jews of the Bible. And it's all an attempt to kind of apply some supersessionist view of the church and separate the Jews and Christians. But these students don't know what they're talking about. Again, they are hearing the Candace Owens argument. That might not watch Candace Owens, but the millions of people who do then bring that to Reddit, and they have conversations on backdoor chat rooms, and they perpetuate these false claims and ideas. And this kid knows absolutely nothing what he's talking about. He doesn't even know the holy scriptures of Judaism, and yet he's making a very, very strong claim against the Jews. And again, they are getting these talking points from somewhere. This kid didn't just like walk up to challenge Charlie Kirt on something that he has no idea about. He heard this from someone else.
I don't agree to disagreement. It's very clear. It's that you don't even know the stuff you're bringing up to make someone look bad.
Do you agree or disagree?
Of course, I disagree with rabbinic Judaism. I'm a Christian. Jesus is the solution. I hope every Jew gives their life to Christ.
This debating thing, and
but hold on, this is very important.
You're trying to get clicks out of it. All I'm asking you is,
no, you were trying to get clicks out. Who was trying to get clicks? He was trying to get clicks out of trying to read the Talmud. You don't even know what it is. The Talmud.
Okay, that's why I'm asking.
Let me ask you a question. Do we as Christians have a biblical obligation to the Jews?
I think this is really a good point that Charlie Kirt is positioning to this young man. But another thing I want everyone to take note of is in the background, you see dissension in the crowd, which typically is there to like support Charlie and cheer him on. And when he asked, do Christians have a mandate to support the Jews? And are we grafted into the Jewish promise? We didn't replace the Jewish promise. You hear people in the crowd saying no. Again, this kid is not the only one espousing these ideas. If you listen to what the people in the crowd are saying, they are echoing the statements he's making. And again, those are other Gen Z conservative, presumably conservative male and females.
You tell me, since I'm not knowledgeable on it.
Yes, we do. Paul says that's fine. Yes, I'm sure we're gonna have a Catholic disagree. People.
This guy's an idiot. He knows nothing. I don't even know if he's a Christian by the language he's using. He seems quite uneducated.
Say we're the new Israel. But hold on a second.
How can you believe that there's the chosen people? You're Christian.
Hold on a second, because Paul said first to the Jews.
Okay.
Paul was around in the time after the resurrection.
Someone just screamed in the background, wrong. Okay, well, that's in our scriptures.
Christ. Don't you acknowledge that there was something special in the book of Exodus when God decided to work miraculously of those people out of Egypt and bring them into the desert? Isn't that a chosen people? Secondly, the covenant, the law, the Decalogue, the Torah, they are the keepers of the law. In fact, that's why it says in Galatians 3, the law is a school teacher of Jesus Christ. Genesis 12:3, if you bless Israel, I will bless you. Same thing in the book of Numbers. And so what I'm getting at, we as Christians are bound to bless the state of Israel and to bless Jews.
How can you bless yourself, man?
Of course, but let's just talk more about
this. Kid has no idea about theology at all, and it shows.
Israel. Do you think who's the bad actor, Israel or Hamas?
I believe that Hamas.
There is people in the crowd screaming Israel. Again, normally the people who come to watch Charlie Kirt debate are fans of his work. They're there to support him, and they're probably there to watch some really liberal kids get their butts handed to them, because just like this kid here, they oftentimes espouse things that they know nothing about. But you hear people in the crowd saying Israel. And a lot of the people in the crowd are white Caucasians wearing Make America Great Again hats. I don't want to generalize the crowd. I don't know who is there. But again, I think it highlights the shift happening on the right and the division when it comes to Israel, and how the woke right and woke left converge on being anti-Israel. And I think that's dangerous because, again, on the right, it's moving very mainstream.
This is doing wrong, but that's not okay for what Israel is doing to the Palestinians.
What is Israel doing exactly? Tell me in detail. Where's it happening? War crimes, really? How?
Again, he hears this, I'm sure, from Dave Smith and Joe Rogan and the people at Joe Rogan platforms and Tucker Carlson, saying that the Jews in Israel are committing war crimes. And there's a point that Charlie Kirk's about to make, which I think hits the nail on the head.
How they're killing little kids, man.
Well, hold on. Killing kids. You mean they drop leaflets before they bomb in Gaza? They warn civilian corridors before they ever engage militarily. They do emergency medical procedures for any person in Gaza that might need it. Do you understand what's actually?
They're doing good, but it's okay for them to do bad. Then
it's called war, saying. Okay? And in war, sometimes bad things happen. Who started this? That's not a war crime. Throwing around war crime is a ridiculous. You know what a war crime is? A war crime is going into
killing children is a war crime.
Going into
intentionally killing children for who they are is a war crime. But unfortunately, in our modern age and with modern warfare, and the fact that Hamas has drawn the war into civilian centers, the constraint needed by Israel and what Israel has demonstrated to continue an offensive in a densely populated civilian area is quite difficult. And so civilians in total war or in urban warfare, their deaths are negative externalities of war. It is not a war crime in and of itself. What is a war crime, though, is for Hamas to use hospitals and schools as shelters for their ammunition and arms. So Hamas is committing crimes against the Geneva Convention. But civilian casualties of war, as Charlie Kirk is saying, is unfortunately the negative externality of war. War is horrific. And Dave Smith will oftentimes say this, like, oh, well, kids have died. Well, kids have died on both sides of this conflict, and kids die in almost every conflict that has swept the Middle East and Africa, even in the last few decades. And the uncomfortable reality of war doesn't make that a war crime. And again, this is only an outrage that is held when it comes to Israel and their war with Hamas in Gaza. They don't talk about any other war. Israel is not the only modern country to be engaged in active warfare, even at the moment.
Kibbutzes, going into the Nova Music Festival, going into people's places of residences on October 7th and putting...
So, okay, you guys keep bringing up October 7th. You guys are doing bad.
Yeah, it's pretty important.
Okay.
If you're going to all of a sudden attack Jews on their holiest day of the interior of Israel, expect a whirlwind and don't complain about it when it comes forward.
So
Exactly. And here the crowd cheers, which is, to me, a positive reassurance that not everyone is adopting this crazy woke right idea, this anti-Jewish idea or anti-Israel idea. But as Charlie Kirk says, what happened on October 7th was an act of war on the part of Hamas, and then war followed, which is exactly what Hamas expected to happen after October 7th. And the call for an intifada revolution on the left is a call for that to happen continually until Jews are eradicated from the land of Israel, from the river to the sea. And so this lack of accountability for Hamas, the lack of condemnation for Hamas, has also been echoed on the woke right. Tucker Carlson has not had an expert on to talk about Hamas or Islamism. In fact, he actually just interviewed the PM of Qatar, which, by the way, is funding all the dissent happening in the pro-Palestinian, pro-Hamas protests on our American university campuses. Did Tucker Carlson ask him about that? No, he didn't. And so there's this weird alignment between the woke right and the woke left being anti-Israel. And at that point, where the horseshoe kind of meets at the bottom, we see an odd alignment with Islamism, despite the fact that everyone's own interests are undermined by an Islamist view of the world. It's very anti-Western, very anti-Christian. And yet there seems to be a tolerance for Islam and for Islamism on the woke right because they share an anti-Israel bias, and they ignore the fact that Islam calls for death of both Christians and Jews, and we are labeled dhimmi, but we're also infidels. We are people of the book, but we are second-class citizens under the caliphate. And there is no call for accountability when it comes to Islamism and their treatment of Christians. They'll talk about how the Jews treat Christians every single day, but they won't look to the very, very long and thwarted past between Islam and different caliphates and the Ottoman Empire and different Islamist regimes in the region today, and Christian populations which have been ethnically cleansed from the Middle East. So with that, I'm going to end this kind of longer video. But I really want to draw attention to the fact that the woke right is becoming mainstream, and a target audience susceptible to the arguments they're making are, again, Republicans who are fatigued from the last 4 years, and the Brads and Chads, the, toxic masculinity men, the guys who are sympathetic to Andrew Tate, the guys who love Joe Rogan, who are into health, who are libertarians, who are free thinkers. These are the young men who will then carry this worldview into the next generation of leaders and policymakers and leaders of our communities and the doctors and the lawyers. This is a really big problem. And Republicans or conservatives and Christians, such as myself and everyone I work with here at the Philos Project, our mission should be to speak out against this, because we can talk about the woke left all the time, but the woke left and our conservative Christian values will always be at odds. The woke left lives in a postmodern, anti-religious reality and has adopted ideals that views God as dead. So we're never going to agree with the woke left. But the people we do have things in common with, ideologically and theologically, are these woke right Christians, or those who are susceptible to those arguments because they're just simply uneducated, or maybe they're just not like me and I'm inundated with this information on a daily basis. But your average Christian or your average conservative who's living their life might not see the dangers of these new norms or of these policy trends, but they are extremely dangerous, and we on the right need to call it out. All right, with that, I'm going to leave you. Please like, comment, and subscribe to the Philos Project channel. Follow us on X and Instagram, and you can follow me on X at Dom R. Hoff, and I will link all of my own socials in the description box down below. I'll see you in the next episode.